The Adventures of Saeed, Part 3. His first impulse was to make off as fast as he could, but on consideration, he decided to listen to what they were saying in the hope of preventing some mischief. "The porter distinctly said the street on the right-hand side of the bazaar," said one. "He will pass down it tonight with the Grand Vizier." "Good," replied the other. "I am not afraid of the Grand Vizier. He is old and no particular hero, but the Caliph will show fight. Besides, I do not trust him. There will be a dozen or so bodyguards following him, I'll be bound." "Not one soul," answered a third. "Whenever he has been seen at night, it was always either with the Vizier or the Chamberlain alone. Tonight, he must be ours, but he is not to be harmed. I think the best we can do is to throw a lasso over his head. He must not be killed, for we should not get much of a ransom for his corpse, if we had anything at all." Then 1 hour before midnight, they all said together and parted, each in a different direction. Saeed was not a little alarmed, and at first started off to warn the Caliph, but remembering what the fairy had said about Kalum Bek having poisoned his mind against him, he determined to rely upon his own good sword to assist him. So instead of returning to Kalum Bek's house, he sat down upon the steps of a mosque to await the hour before midnight. Shortly before the time, he went and hid himself in the porch of a house in the street the robbers had mentioned. Presently, 2 men came strolling down the street, whom he took at first to be the Caliph and his Vizier. But when they came opposite to him, they clapped their hands softly, and 2 others came hurrying to join them. They whispered a while and parted, 3 hiding themselves in another porch, not far from Saeed, and 1 walking up and down the road. The night was very dark, but quiet, and so Saeed had to trust his sharp ears alone. Half an hour passed before he heard steps coming from the direction of the bazaar. The robber must have heard them also, for he slunk past Saeed towards the bazaar. The steps came nearer, and Saeed could just recognize some dark forms, when the robber clapped his hands softly, and the same moment the 3 in the background darted forward. Those attacked must have been armed, for he heard the clash of swords. Unsheathing his own Damascus steel, he threw himself into the thick of the fray, shouting, "Down with the enemies of the noble Harun!" He felled 1 robber at the first stroke, and then attacked 2 others who were about to disarm a man whom they had caught in a noose. He hewed at the cord blindly to sever it, but in doing so, struck 1 of the robbers so fiercely across the arm that he cut his hand off. But now, the 4th robber, who had been fighting another man, turned towards Saeed, who was still engaged with the 3rd. But the man whose cords had been cut no sooner felt himself free than he drew his dagger and struck 1 of the robbers in the side. The 4th, seeing what had happened, threw away his sword and fled. Saeed was not left long in doubt as to whom he had saved, for the taller of the 2 men approached him and said, "I do not know which is the more incomprehensible, the attack on my life or my freedom, or the surprising manner in which you came to my assistance. How did you know who I was? And did you know of these men's intentions?" "Ruler of the faithful," answered Saeed, "for I do not doubt that you are he. This evening I chanced to walk behind 4 men who were speaking a strange dialect that I once learnt. They spoke of taking you prisoner and of killing your Vizier. As it was too late to come and warn you, I determined to hide myself near the spot they had mentioned for the attack to take place, and to come to your assistance." "I thank you heartily," said Harun, "but I am not anxious to remain here any longer than necessary, and so I give you this ring. Bring it to the palace tomorrow, and I will think how best I can reward you. Come, Vizier, we had best be going." As he spoke, he placed a ring on the young man's finger and then attempted to draw the vizier away. But the latter begged him to excuse him for a moment, and turning to the astonished youth, he handed him a heavy purse. "Young man," said he, "my master, the Caliph, can raise you to any height he pleases, even to be my successor. I myself can do little, but the little I can do is better done today. Therefore, take this purse, and remember that I still count myself your debtor." Quite intoxicated with happiness, Said hurried away home. Here, however, he met with a very bad reception, for Kalum Bek was very angry with him for being so late. He had been afraid lest he had lost his handsome signpost, and so he raged and scolded like a madman. But Said, who had given a glance into his purse and seen that it was full of pieces of gold, thought to himself that now he had sufficient money to take him home, even without the assistance of the Caliph, which he guessed would take no mean form, and so he gave Kalum Bek word for word and told him plainly that he would remain with him no longer. "You rascally vagabond," said Kalum Bek, "where will you obtain a dinner for a night's lodging if I withdraw my protection from you?" "That is no concern of yours," answered Said defiantly. "Goodbye to you, for you will see me no more." So saying, he ran off, whilst Kalum Bek stared after him, dumb with surprise. The next morning, when he had had time to consider matters, he sent his porters out to spy out news of his assistant. And after some time, one of them returned with the news that he had seen Said come out of a mosque and enter a caravan. He was wearing a handsome dress, a dagger and sword, and a magnificent turban. When Kalum Bek heard this, he said, "He must have robbed me and dressed himself up on my money. Oh, what an unfortunate man I am!" He hastened to the chief of the police, and as it was known that he was a relative of Mesrour the Chamberlain, he had no difficulty in getting an order for Said's arrest. Said was calmly sitting outside a caravan conversing with a merchant whom he had met there about the journey to Balsora, his native town, when suddenly several men fell upon him and bound his hands behind him in spite of his resistance. He asked by what right they used such violence, and they replied that it was in the name of the law and by the instigation of his master, Kalum Bek. And Kalum Bek himself, appearing at that moment, mocked and reviled Said, and, plunging his hand into the young man's pocket, drew forth, to the surprise of the surrounding people, a large purse full of gold. "Do you see what he has stolen from me?" he yelled in triumph, and the bystanders looked at Said in disgust. "So young, so handsome, and yet so wicked," they said. "To prison with him, that he may be flogged." So they dragged him away to prison, followed by a crowd of people calling out, "Do you see the handsome shop assistant from the bazaar? He robbed his master of 200 gold pieces and then ran away." Brought before the chief of the police, Said would have defended himself, but the officer would not allow him to speak, and only listened to Kalum Bek, who declared that the money and purse found upon Said belonged to him. The judge, therefore, ordered the money to be given to Kalum Bek, but it did not gain him possession of the handsome young assistant, who was worth at least 1,000 gold pieces to him. "In accordance with the law passed by my illustrious master, the Caliph, a few days ago," said the judge, "every thief who steals over 100 gold pieces is to be sent to perpetual banishment on a desert island. This thief has fallen into my hands exactly at the right time, for he completes the number of 20 such fellows. Tomorrow they will be packed on board a ship and sent to sea." Said was in despair. He begged the officer to listen to him and to allow him to speak one word to the Caliph, but he found no mercy. Kalum Bek, who now regretted the false accusation, also spoke in his favor, but the judge answered, "You have your money, and you can be content. Go home and keep quiet. Otherwise, I shall fine you 10 gold pieces for every word you utter in argument." Kallum was silent then. The judge motioned with his hand, and the unhappy Saeed was led away. He was taken to a dark, damp prison where 19 other unfortunate creatures were lying about on some moldy straw. They received their new companion with rude laughter and horrible expressions of anger against the judge and the caliph. Terrible as it seemed to him to be doomed to be cast upon a desert island, yet he comforted himself with the thought of leaving his loathsome prison, thinking it could not be so bad when once they had put to sea. But he was deceived, for the 20 criminals were cast down into the hold, which was pitch dark, very close, and so low that it was impossible to stand upright. The anchor was weighed, and Saeed wept bitter tears as the ship receded from his native land. Once a day, the prisoners received a little bread and fruit and a drink of water. The atmosphere was so close and unhealthy that almost every other day one of the prisoners was found dead, but Saeed's youth and splendid health saved him. They had been at sea about a fortnight when there was an unaccustomed running to and fro upon deck, and the roaring of the waves and pitching of the vessel having increased, Saeed guessed that there was a storm raging. As the rocking of the vessel grew worse and worse, shrieks and lamentations resounded from below, and when the prisoners found that the hold was filling with water, they knocked at the trapdoor, and as no one answered, they threw themselves against it, and their united strength burst it open. As they came upon deck, they found that the crew had deserted them and taken to the boats. Most of the prisoners were in despair, for the violence of the storm seemed, if anything, to increase. They took a last meal of the provisions they found on the ship, when suddenly the ship, which had been stuck fast upon a rock, was washed off by an enormous wave and sank. Saeed had managed to secure a floating spar, and by using his feet as oars, he had kept himself afloat for some time, when suddenly the little magic whistle on the golden chain slipped from his vest, and he thought he would try it once more. This time it gave forth a clear silvery tone, and in a moment the storm had subsided as though oil had been poured upon the waves. He was about to gaze around him to see if land were in sight, when he noticed a peculiar movement in the spar upon which he sat astride, and in some alarm he saw that it had turned into an enormous dolphin and was carrying him along as swiftly as an arrow. He guessed he had his good fairy to thank for this, and called out his thanks to her. His extraordinary steed went at such speed that before evening fell, he sighted land and became aware that he was in a wide river. As they were going against the stream, the pace slowed down a little. Saeed was very hungry, so he blew his whistle and wished for a meal. Immediately, the huge fish stopped. A table rose up from the water, as dry as though it had been a week in the broad sunshine. It was set out with the most delicious food and drink imaginable, and Saeed set to and made a hearty meal, for since his imprisonment, his food had been scanty and unappetizing. When he at length satisfied his hunger, he uttered his thanks and the table disappeared. He dug his heels into the dolphin's sides, and it began to swim on again. As the sun began to sink, Saeed saw a town in the distance, the towers of which seemed to him to resemble those of Baghdad. He had no great wish to land in Baghdad, but his faith in the good fairy was so strong that he was sure she would not allow him to fall into the hands of the wicked Kallum Bek. About a mile distant from the town, Saeed noticed a fine country mansion, and to his surprise, the dolphin began to steer towards it. Upon the roof of the house were several well-dressed men, and on the shore were a number of servants, all of whom were staring at him in astonishment. A flight of marble steps led from the water to the mansion, and here the dolphin stopped, and Said had scarcely set foot upon the steps when the fish disappeared. At once, some servants hurried towards him and begged him in their master's name to go up to him after he had changed his wet clothing. They brought a suit of clothes to him, and having dressed hastily, he followed the servants to the roof, where he found 3 men, the tallest and handsomest of whom came towards him with a friendly smile. "Who are you, wonderful stranger?" he asked. "Who can tame the fishes of the sea, so that you can guide them to the right or left as a good horseman guides his charger? Are you a magician or a man like ourselves?" "Sir," replied Said, "I have been a most unfortunate man for some time past, but if you will give me permission, I will tell you all about it." And he commenced to tell his story from the moment he left his father's house until the time of his wonderful escape. He was interrupted frequently by exclamations of astonishment, but as he concluded, the master of the house said, "I believe you implicitly, Said, but you tell us that you won a gold chain at the tournament, and that the Caliph gave you his ring. Can you produce these?" "I carry them next to my heart," said the youth, "and would only part with them with my life, for I consider the saving of the Caliph's life to have been the noblest action I could have performed." With that, he handed the chain and ring to the men. "By the beard of the Prophet, it is my ring!" cried the tall, handsome man. "Grand Vizier, come and let us embrace our deliverer." It seemed to Said that he must be dreaming when the 2 embraced him, and immediately he flung himself upon his face and said, "Pardon me, ruler of the faithful, for having spoken as I did before, for I perceive now that you are none other than Harun al-Rashid, the great Caliph of Baghdad." "I am your friend," answered Harun, "and from this time your troubles are all over. Come with me to Baghdad, and you shall be one of my most trusted officials, for you proved your mettle the night you saved my life." Said thanked him and said how gladly he would remain with him always, if only he would allow him first to go and visit his father, who must be in great sorrow and trouble on his account. The Caliph assented readily to this, and so they mounted their horses and rode into Baghdad, which they reached just as the sun was setting. The Caliph ordered a magnificent suite of apartments to be prepared for Said, and besides this, promised to build him a house of his own. The Caliph's brother and the Grand Vizier's son, Said's old companion in arms, hastened to come to him as soon as they heard what had occurred. They embraced the gallant defender of their ruler and begged him to be their friend, but they were speechless with astonishment when he handed the gold chain to them and said, "I have been your friend for a long time. Do you not remember this chain?" They had only known him with a beard and a dark brown complexion, and when he told them why he had disguised himself, and when he had proved to them by a bout of fencing that he was really Al-Mansur, they embraced him joyfully and said they reckoned themselves fortunate in having such a friend. The following day, as Said was sitting with the Caliph and the Grand Vizier, the Chamberlain Masrur entered and said, "Ruler of the faithful, I wish to ask a favor." "Tell me first what it is," answered the Caliph. "Without stands my cousin Kalum Bek, a well-known merchant of the bazaar. He has a curious affair with a man from Balsara, whose son was Kalum's servant, but who robbed him and ran off. No one knows thither. And now the father demands his son from Kalum, who cannot produce him. And Kalum begs that you should, in virtue of your wisdom and great learning, decide between him and the man from Balsara." "I will judge between them," replied Harun. "Let your cousin and his adversary appear in the Hall of Justice in half an hour's time." When Masrur had thanked the Caliph and withdrawn, Harun said, "It is your father, Said, and as I fortunately know the whole truth of the case, I will give judgment like Solomon. You shall conceal yourself behind the curtains of my throne until I call you, and you, Grand Vizier, Send at once for the wicked and all too hasty police officer. I shall need him as a witness." Both did as they were requested. Saeed's heart beat quickly when he saw his father's pale and careworn face and noticed the tottering steps with which he entered the justice hall. But Khalum Beg's confident smile, as he whispered to his cousin, the chamberlain, enraged him so that he could scarcely restrain himself from rushing out and giving him a good beating, for he owed the greater number of his sufferings to this wicked man. The hall was crowded with people who wished to hear the Caliph pronounce justice, and as soon as the ruler of Baghdad had taken his seat on the throne, the Grand Vizier commanded silence and then asked who it was that appeared as complainant. Khalum Beg stepped forward with a bold look on his face and said, "Some days ago, a crier was going through the bazaar, offering a purse of gold for news of Saeed of Balsara. As the Saeed had been in my employ, I said, 'Here, friend, I can earn your purse of gold.' Then this man, who is so hostile towards me now, came to me in a friendly fashion and asked what I knew. I replied, 'You are Benazar, his father?' And as he joyfully agreed, I went on to tell him how I had found Saeed in the desert and saved him and taken care of him and brought him back to Baghdad. In the joy of his heart, he gave me the purse of gold, but the foolish man, when I went on to tell him how his son had served me and how he had run off with my money, would not believe me and demanded both his money and his son. Neither could I give him, for the money belonged to me in payment of the news I had given him, and his worthless son I cannot give him back." Next Benazar spoke, defending his son, and saying that he was incapable of stealing, being of a noble and virtuous mind, and he begged the Caliph to inquire deeply into the matter. "I hope you did your duty and gave information of the theft, Khalum Beg," said the Caliph. "Certainly," he replied, smiling. "I took him before the magistrate." "Let the magistrate be called," said the Caliph, and to everyone's surprise, he appeared immediately. The Caliph asked him if he remembered the affair, and he assured him he did. "Did you examine the young man, and did he acknowledge the theft?" asked Harun. "No, he was most obstinate, and would confess to none but you," replied the magistrate. "But I do not remember having seen him," said the Caliph. "No, indeed," answered the magistrate. "I might take up too much of your time if I sent you every vagabond who wishes to speak with you." "You know that my ear is open to all," answered Harun, "but perhaps the proofs of the theft were so clear that you did not think it necessary to bring him to me. You had doubtless witnesses, Khalum, to prove that the money really was yours?" "Witnesses?" he asked, turning pale. "No, I had no witness, for you know, ruler of the faithful, that one piece of gold is exactly like another, so how could I bring witnesses to prove that these actual pieces were missing from my money chest?" "Then how did you know that that particular sum of money belonged to you?" asked the Caliph. "On account of the purse they were in," said Khalum. "Have you got the purse here?" he inquired further. "Here it is," said the merchant, and taking out a purse, he handed it to the Grand Vizier that he might give it to the Caliph. But the Vizier cried out in feigned astonishment, "By the beard of the Prophet, the purse is yours? You dog! The purse belongs to me, and I gave it, filled with 100 gold pieces, to a brave young man who rescued me from a great danger." "Can you swear to that?" asked the Caliph. "I am perfectly certain," replied the Vizier. "My daughter worked it for me." "Ah, you have received false information, magistrate," said the Caliph. "Why did you believe the purse belonged to Khalum?" "He swore it was his," said the magistrate anxiously. "And so you swore falsely?" thundered the Caliph to the merchant, who stood pale and trembling before him. "Allah, Allah," cried he, "of course I do not wish to say anything against the Grand Vizier, but the purse is really mine, and the good-for-nothing Saeed stole it." I would give 1,000 gold pieces if he were here on the spot." "What did you do with this Saeed then?" asked the Caliph. "Where must we send to bring him here?" "I sent him to a desert island," said the magistrate. "Oh, Saeed, my son, my son," cried the unhappy father. "Then he confessed his crime?" asked the Caliph. The magistrate turned pale and said unsteadily, "If I remember rightly, he did in the end." "Then you are not quite certain?" the Caliph went on in severe tones. "Very well. Then we will ask him himself. Saeed, stand forth. And you, Kalum Bek, pay me at once 1,000 gold pieces because he is here on the spot." Kalum and the magistrate thought it must be a ghost. They fell to their knees, crying, "Mercy, mercy!" Benazar was half fainting with joy and fell into the arms of his lost son. Then in firm, hard tones, the Caliph asked, "Magistrate, here is Saeed. Now will you affirm that he confessed his crime?" "No, no," howled the magistrate. "I only listen to Kalum's evidence because he is looked upon as a respectable man." "Did I appoint you judge that you should only listen to rich people?" cried Harun with contempt and anger. "I will banish you to a desert island for 10 years so that you may have time to think on justice. And you, miserable man, who restored the dying, not for the sake of saving him, but to make him your slave, you shall pay the 1,000 gold pieces." Kalum rejoiced to be let off so cheaply and was about to thank the Caliph when he went on, "For swearing falsely about the money, you will receive 100 strokes on the soles of your feet. Further, it is for Saeed to decide whether he shall take the whole of your shop and possession with you as his slave, or whether he will be satisfied with 10 pieces of gold for every day he served you." "Let the miserable old wretch go," cried the youth. "I wish for nothing that was his." "No," replied Harun, "I intend you to be compensated. I will choose for you the 10 pieces of gold for every day, and you must reckon how many days you were in his clutches. And now, away with the miserable creatures." When they had been taken away, the Caliph led Benazar and Saeed into another room. There, he told the father of the brave manner in which his son had saved his life, his recital being interrupted by the yells of Kalum, whose 100 gold pieces were being counted out on the soles of his feet. The Caliph invited Benazar, together with Saeed, to live with him in Baghdad. He agreed, but made one journey home in order that he might fetch his large fortune. Saeed took up his residence at once in the palace built for him by the grateful Caliph, and lived there like a prince. The Caliph's brother and the Grand Vizier's son were his constant companions, and it became a password in Baghdad, "I wish I were as good and happy as Saeed, the son of Benazar." The end. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this tale. I also wanted to let you know that I now have a Facebook page for Annie stories as well. You can check out the link in the description below if you'd like. Thanks for all your kind support.